The Disneyland Railroad. It's the first attraction you see when you enter the park, and it's the oldest operating ride in the park's history, debuting on opening day. Not only does it provide convenient transportation around Disneyland, but it stands as a charming old-school attraction suitable for all guests. However, behind the ride's nostalgic appeal, there's a massive machine that needs special care to be kept safe and operational. Behind the scenes, it takes a dedicated crew of trained staff to keep the railroad running, and one misstep can lead to serious consequences. In 2004, something did go wrong when a sudden flash fire seriously injured one of the workers on the train. This incident was never widely reported on, but just because it didn't result in a fatality doesn't mean it's not worth discussing. But what exactly did happen? Let's take a look at the 2004 Disneyland train fire right here on Theme Park Crazy. Today, we'll be discussing how crucial safety measures are to operating a popular steam locomotive. These measures are just as crucial as the measures to ensure your own safety, especially online. In these cases, one thing that can help out is this video's sponsor, Aura. Have you ever searched your name or email online only to find it listed on some random website you've never heard of? I did that recently, and I was shocked. I found my information, including my full name and email, on data broker sites I never signed up for. Some even listed my voter registration info. Honestly, it was pretty scary. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your number or why you get spammed with junk emails and robocalls, it's due to data brokers. Data brokers are companies that collect your information and sell it without your consent. Marketers, scammers, even stalkers can buy access to that data while brokers make billions. These companies are required to remove your info if you ask, but they make it convoluted and difficult on purpose. That's where Aura comes in. Aura automatically scans hundreds of these sites and requests removals on your behalf. Moreover, Aura is an all-in-one digital safety tool. You get real-time alerts if your info ends up on the dark web, if your bank accounts are compromised, or if someone tries to open credit in your name. Plus, you get a VPN, an antivirus, and password manager. Not only that, but Aura provides US-based support available around the clock if something goes wrong. And if anything does happen, Aura includes $5 million in identity theft insurance and fraud experts available to you 24/7. That's why I chose Aura, because I value the privacy of my information. And honestly, it's good to know someone's watching your back. Head to aura.com/themeparkcrazy and you can try Aura free for 14 days. That's 2 weeks where you can actually see what data of yours is out there and start getting it removed without lifting a finger. Scrub your data off the dark web, just like at this car wash. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Special thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video. First, a little background on the Disneyland Railroad as a whole. This attraction was pretty much a passion project of Walt Disney himself. Walt had been fascinated by trains since childhood. His father's cousin was a railroad engineer, and Walt even sold snacks and newspapers on trains as a teenager. Later in life, he even built a fully functional miniature railroad in his backyard in Los Angeles, California. This railway, named the Carrollwood Pacific, came complete with a working steam engine named the Lily Bell. This railway became a local sensation, and Walt allowed members of the public to ride on weekends and even drive it sometimes. Unfortunately, after a guest accidentally derailed the train and injured a 5-year-old girl, Walt closed down the Carrollwood Pacific and put the Lily Bell in storage. Despite this setback, Walt was still interested in opening another railway to the public. Even before the derailment, discussions were had about including a railroad as part of a potential tour of Walt Disney Studios in Burbank, California. Walt realized that a tour of a standard animation studio wouldn't provide the whimsical fantasy that had become synonymous with the Disney brand. So eventually, the idea morphed into the world-changing theme park known as Disneyland. This park would contain several heavily themed and immersive lands, connecting them all together with a fully functioning railroad. Building such a creation would prove to be an ambitious undertaking and quite expensive too. So to save money on construction, Disney officials entered a sponsorship deal with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway Company, or the Santa Fe for short. After months of rigorous construction and planning, the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad opened to the public with the rest of Disneyland on July 17, 1955. Initially, there were only 2 stations in Main Street, USA and Frontierland. These were followed by the Fantasyland station's debut in 1956 and the Tomorrowland station's opening in 1958. Nowadays, after several layout changes, the railroad has 4 stops: Main Street USA, New Orleans Square, Mickey's Toontown, and Tomorrowland. Upon the railroad's initial opening, there were also only 2 operating trains built by Walt Disney Studios themselves. Train number 1 was the CK Holiday, and train number 2 was the EP Ripley. As the park grew in popularity, Walt soon realized more trains were needed for capacity reasons. In another effort to save money, Disney sought to acquire already existing trains and restore them for use on the railroad. In 1957, Disney would end up acquiring train number 3 and the subject of today's video, the Fred Gurley. Named after the Santa Fe Railway's president, the Fred Gurley was originally built all the way back in 1894 by Pennsylvania-based manufacturer Baldwin Locomotive Works. Originally, the train was used to transport sugarcane in Louisiana. Funnily enough, it would soon be used to transport guests to New Orleans Square, in California that is. Eventually, the Fred Gurley's acquisition was followed by the Ernest S. Marsh in 1959, and eventually the Ward Kimball all the way forward in 2005. But about a year before the latter train's debut, the Fred Gurley would be the subject of a serious incident. Now, in order to fully understand what happened, it's crucial that we discuss the basics of how a steam locomotive works. So with the help of YouTube channel Worlds in Motion, let's take a visual look. At its core, a steam locomotive is a mobile boiler system. The process starts in the firebox, where fuel, traditionally wood or more famously coal, is burned to create heat. In Disney's case, their trains are built to run on diesel oil as it's cleaner than coal. Later on, they would end up running on biodiesel, partially made from used fryer oil. Essentially, the diesel is sprayed into the firebox with a device known as an atomizer. It's kind of like a perfume bottle, spraying the flammable diesel out and greatly increasing its surface area. This allows for an easy and effective ignition that starts a flame in the firebox. Once the fire gets started, the heat then travels through a series of flues inside a large water-filled tank called the boiler. The raging fire boils the water, producing steam. This steam rises to the top of the boiler and collects in a chamber called the steam dome, where it's drawn off for use. From there, the pressurized steam is sent into a superheater, which sends the steam into cylinders on the sides of the locomotive. Inside each cylinder is a piston. As steam enters, it pushes the pistons back and forth, and that motion is converted into rotary force via a system of rods connected to the train's wheels. Also worth noting, as excess steam is exhausted from the cylinders, it shoots up and out of the stack. This rush of exiting steam also has another function, pulling fresh air into the firebox. This draft draws in oxygen, which keeps the flames nice, hot, and spicy. Without it, the fire would struggle to breathe. While all of this is going on, there are 2 main crew members inside the locomotive's cabin, an engineer and a fireman. The engineer is responsible for mechanically operating the locomotive, controlling its acceleration and braking. While the engineer operates the locomotive, the fireman is responsible for the firebox. As described in the book, The Disneyland Railroad, A Complete History in Words and Pictures, the fireman's job is a juggling act, as they have to oversee multiple elements at once, which brings us to the incident in question. One of the biggest challenges for any train's fireman is when the fire somehow goes out. This can occur for multiple reasons, but one of them, as noted in the book, is wheel slip. This occurs when the train's wheels lose traction with the rails and suddenly start spinning faster in place. This speeds up the pistons and causes excessive draft as steam exits the stack. When too much air is pulled through the firebox at once, it can snuff out the fire, much like blowing out a candle. This issue is especially relevant on the Disneyland Railroad, where the rails are heavily lubricated with grease in order to reduce the noise of the wheels grinding on tight curves. The Disneyland Railroad book described the locomotives as, quote, practically swimming in lubricant. If the fire does go out, relighting it requires a specific process that must be conducted carefully. First, the firemen must turn off the fuel line and the atomizer. Then, they must open the blower to remove excess diesel vapors. Afterwards, they soak a piece of cotton cloth in fuel and ignite it before throwing it into the firebox. Crucially, the flaming cotton must be placed in front of the burner. This way, once the fuel line and atomizer are turned back on, the fire is reignited quickly and efficiently. Failure to do all of these steps correctly can have chaotic consequences, and those consequences occurred on April 4, 2004. The following information was gathered from a report from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA for short, with additional details from the aforementioned Disneyland Railroad book. At approximately 9 p.m. on April 4th, the Fred Gurley was at the Tomorrowland station. Suddenly, the flame in the firebox went out. The firemen went through the standard relighting procedure, turning off the fuel line and the atomizer. But it was after igniting the cloth that a crucial error was made. According to the OSHA report, due to the position of the wick, more fuel vapor than normal entered the box before the fire lit. Essentially, it was like leaving the gas on your grill for too long while still trying to ignite it. When the vapors found the ignition source, an explosive flash fire suddenly came out of the firebox. This fire blasted through the firebox door. The engineer was apparently physically blown out of the cabin. Meanwhile, the fireman took a direct hit from the fire, which went through his clothing and caused second-degree burns on his knees. He also received first and second-degree flash burns on his wrist and face. The fireman ended up being hospitalized for 2 days, though thankfully there were no fatalities. Likely because there were no fatalities, this incident was not widely reported on, and the only 2 sources I found on it were the OSHA report and the book. Still, I was surprised I couldn't find any reporting on this incident. Disneyland is one of the most heavily scrutinized theme parks on Earth, and even minor accidents often make headlines. Since it didn't involve guests or result in life-threatening injuries, it may have been considered a low-profile workplace incident rather than a public safety concern. But again, just because an accident doesn't result in death doesn't mean it's not worth talking about. As awesome as trains are, these are complex, temperamental machines that require constant care and utmost respect. And when something goes wrong, the consequences can be extremely dangerous. That's why we really have to respect the people who work on these machines. The Disneyland Railroad is more than just a way from getting from point A to point B. It's a responsibility rigorously undertaken by workers. So the next time you catch a ride on the Disneyland Railroad, or any train for that matter, don't forget to appreciate the people who keep things in check. Now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my previous video and read them out. These comments come from my video on strange dark rides you've never seen. Joseph Welt says, a couple of the Ghost Train dark rides look strange and cheesy, but the good kind of cheesy. NYI Samurai says, musical circus song is a banger. Mizu the Floatzel says, it feels weird hearing the Japanese voice actor of Luffy singing as a rabbit. Moultrie Geek says, all hail Flying Spaghetti Monster the ride. Ramen brothers and sisters, ramen. And Fluffy Dog Studio 6456 says, wow. Thank you all so much, and I will put a link in the description if you want to support me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.